The champagne flute trembled in Quan Jinwu's hand. He stood on the dais, a man carved from shadow and steel, poured into a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than the car he had gifted his bride-to-be. The microphone hummed, waiting. Below him, a sea of Seoul's elite, a glittering collection of sharks and swans, held their collective breath. He was supposed to be giving a toast to his future, to the merger of two powerful families, symbolized by the woman in white seated at the head table. He had not looked at her once. His eyes, dark and depthless, were fixed on a disturbance near the gilded edge of the room. A server, a young woman in a simple black uniform, had stumbled. A tray of drinks, ruby-red cocktails, had gone airborne. One glass had upended itself directly onto the pristine silk of a bridesmaid's dress. A collective gasp rippled through the guests closest to the disaster. The server, her face a mask of pure horror, began to stammer apologies, bowing repeatedly. The bride, his bride, Chedin, turned. A smile, thin and cruel, stretched her perfectly painted lips. She did not rise. She did not help. She leaned toward her friend, the victim of the spill, and whispered something. The friend laughed. Then another joined in. A small, vicious circle of laughter, sharp as broken glass, aimed at the mortified young woman who was now on her knees, dabbing at the stain with a useless napkin. Jinwoo watched her. He watched the frantic, trembling movements of her hands. He watched the flush of shame creep up her neck. He watched the way she kept her eyes glued to the floor, as if willing it to swallow her whole. And in that moment, the entire suffocating artifice of his life fell away. The arranged marriage, the business deal it represented, the polite lies and brutal truths of his existence. It all became a distant, meaningless noise. All he could see was her. Soyeon. He lowered the microphone. The humming stopped. A sudden, unnerving silence fell over the grand ballroom. He placed the champagne flute down on the lectern with a quiet, definitive click that echoed like a gunshot. He stepped off the dais. Every eye in the room followed him as he moved, a predator cutting through a herd. He ignored the confused look from Chedin's father. He ignored the warning glare from his own uncle. He walked past the head table, his stride unhurried and absolute. He did not stop until he stood before the kneeling server. He looked down at her, at the dark hair falling over her face, hiding her from the world. He felt a familiar protective rage build in his chest, a fire he had tried so hard to extinguish for her sake. For nothing. "Get up," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of undisputed command. Soyeon flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes, wide and luminous with unshed tears, finally met his. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of confusion and deeper panic. Jinwoo. Here. Now. He held out a hand. After a beat of stunned hesitation, she took it. Her fingers were cold. He pulled her to her feet. He kept her hand in his, a silent anchor in the swirling storm of whispers. Then, he turned to face the room, to face his bride, whose smile had finally frozen and shattered. "The wedding is off," Kwon Jinwoo announced, his voice a blade of ice. "My apologies for wasting your time. Please, enjoy the food. My family will cover the expense." And without another glance at the life he was detonating, he led Soyeon through the stunned crowd and out of the ballroom, leaving chaos and the wreckage of 2 dynasties in his wake. 3 months earlier, Soyeon's world had been composed of the smell of stale coffee, the ache in her feet, and the relentless hum of a city that never slept and never cared. She worked 2 jobs, a barista by day, a cleaner for a small office building by night, and every one she earned was a tiny soldier sent to fight a losing war against her family's debt. Her father's failed business had left a crater in their lives, and her mother's failing health was a constant low-grade fever of anxiety. Her only escape was a small, secret dream she nurtured in the quietest hours of the night, a flower shop. A tiny space filled with the scent of lilies and damp earth, a place where she could create beauty instead of just cleaning up after others. It was a fantasy, as distant and unattainable as the penthouse lights that glittered on the peaks of Gangnam's skyscrapers. "You're staring again," Bora said, sliding a tray of dirty mugs onto the counter beside her. Bora was her coworker at the cafe, her best friend, and her anchor to reality. "Staring at the rich people buildings won't pay your mother's hospital bills," Soyeon sighed, the sound lost in the hiss of the espresso machine. "I know, I was just thinking." "About flowers that cost more per stem than we make in an hour?" Bora teased gently. "Something like that," Soyeon admitted, forcing a smile. It was a life of quiet desperation, of making ends meet and never, ever getting ahead. She was resilient, yes. She was a survivor. But she was so tired. She felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's more important lives. She had no idea she was about to be seen. Kwon Jin-woo existed in a world of polished glass and cold, hard numbers. His penthouse was a monument to minimalist wealth, a sterile cage with a breathtaking view of the city he owned in all but name. He had inherited the Phoenix Syndicate from his father, a sprawling empire with roots in construction and logistics and darker, deeper roots in less savory enterprises. It was a crown he had never wanted, a throne of obligations and violence. He felt more like a warden than a king. "The Park family is getting bold," Min-jun, his second-in-command and only friend, reported, standing ramrod straight before Jinwoo's expansive desk. "They're moving on our territory in Incheon." Jinwoo stared out the floor-to-ceiling window, his jaw tight. He could see the entire city spread below him, a carpet of glittering lights. It looked beautiful from up here. Peaceful. It was a lie. Down there in the streets, it was a war of 1,000 tiny cuts, and he was the general. "Make an example of one of their shipments," Jinwoo said, his voice flat. "Something public, something loud. Remind them why they should stay in their own sandbox." Min-jun nodded, his expression unreadable. "And your uncle?" Jinwoo's hand clenched into a fist on his desk. His uncle, Kwon Tae-man, was a relic of the old ways, a man who believed power grew only from the barrel of a gun and the fear it inspired. He saw Jinwoo's attempts to legitimize their businesses, to move them away from the explicit criminality of his father's era, as weakness. "My uncle will do as he is told," Jinwoo said, a chill in his tone. "For now." Loneliness was a physical presence in the room, as tangible as the expensive leather of his chair. He was surrounded by people, employees, rivals, enemies, sycophants, but he was utterly alone. He commanded respect and fear, but never warmth, never connection. At 32, he had everything a man could want and nothing he truly needed. His life was a ledger of calculated risks and brutal necessities, and his soul was the collateral. That night, for reasons he could not articulate, he accepted an invitation to a charity gala at the National Museum. A political necessity, a night of shaking hands and making veiled threats disguised as pleasantries. He was bored before he even arrived. He stood near a display of ancient Celadon pottery, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, his mind 1,000,000 miles away on a shipping container in Incheon. He scanned the room with a practiced, dismissive gaze, the same faces, the same expensive dresses, the same hungry eyes. And then he saw her. She was not a guest. She was part of the catering staff, refilling a tray of appetizers. She moved with a quiet efficiency, an island of calm in the swirling social currents. There was nothing overtly spectacular about her. She wore a simple black uniform, her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. But as he watched, she paused. Another server, a young man who looked flustered and overwhelmed, dropped a small plate. It shattered on the marble floor. Before a supervisor could descend, the woman, His woman, a voice in his head whispered with shocking possessiveness, knelt down. She gave the young man a small, reassuring smile, a flash of genuine warmth that was so out of place in this cold, calculated room that it hit Jinu like a physical blow. She quickly and carefully picked up the broken pieces, her movements deft and sure. The world went silent. The chatter of the gala, the clinking of glasses, the low thrum of the orchestra, it all faded into nothing. It was just her. The way her brow furrowed in concentration, the stray wisp of hair that had escaped her ponytail and brushed against her cheek, the innate, unforced grace in her posture, even as she performed a menial task. She was real. In a world of fakes, she was the only real thing he had ever seen. Kwon Jin-woo, the man who controlled half of Seoul's underworld, the man who had never known a moment of hesitation, was frozen. He felt a crack appear in the icy armor around his heart. A feeling, fierce and terrifying and utterly new, flooded through him. He had to know her. It was no longer a thought. It was a command from the deepest part of his soul. Life for Soyeon took a strange and inexplicable turn the week after the gala she barely remembered working. On Monday, she received a call from the hospital. An anonymous benefactor had settled her mother's outstanding medical bills in full. All of them. Soyeon had stood on the street, phone pressed to her ear, in a state of dumbfounded shock. It had to be a mistake. On Wednesday, the thuggish loan shark who had been making threatening calls to her family suddenly went silent. When she cautiously called his office, a nervous-sounding man informed her the debt had been forgiven and that she was never to contact them again. He had sounded terrified. By Friday, she was convinced she was either dreaming or losing her mind. She told Bora everything over lukewarm bowls of ramen after their shift. An anonymous benefactor? A forgiven loan shark? Bora's eyes were wide. Soyeon, that's not a benefactor. That's a fairy godmother. Or something else. She lowered her voice. Something scary. It has to be a mistake, Soyeon insisted, though her own conviction was wavering. A clerical error. It'll all be straightened out, and I'll be back to owing my firstborn child to 3 different people by next week. But the mistake was never corrected. The weight on her shoulders was lighter, but a new, more unsettling feeling replaced it. The sense of being watched, of being managed by an invisible hand. The hand revealed itself the following Tuesday. He walked into the cafe during the mid-afternoon lull. The bell over the door chimed, and Soyeon looked up from wiping down the counter, a generic welcome on her lips. The word died in her throat. He was, without exaggeration, the most handsome man she had ever seen. Tall and broad-shouldered, in a dark suit that whispered of impossible expense. His face was all sharp angles and severe beauty, a stark contrast softened only by the intense, unwavering focus of his eyes as they landed on her. There was a faint silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny flaw that only made him more arresting. He walked directly to the counter, his gaze never leaving hers. Soyeon felt a jolt, a strange mix of intimidation and a deeply unnerving flutter in her stomach. "I'll have a coffee," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "What kind?" she managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Just coffee, black." She turned to the machine, her hands suddenly clumsy. She could feel his eyes on her back, a tangible pressure. She was used to being invisible. This feeling, this intense, focused attention, was completely foreign. She poured the coffee, her hand shaking slightly as she placed the cup on the counter. "That will be 4,000 won, she said, avoiding his eyes. He didn't reach for his wallet. He simply watched her. "Your mother," he said, his voice soft. "Is she feeling better?" Soyeon's head snapped up. Her blood ran cold. How do you know about my mother?" A flicker of something, regret, self-deprecation, crossed his features. I made some inquiries. I was worried. You were worried? She repeated, her voice sharp with suspicion. You're the one. The hospital bills. The loan. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Soyeon felt a wave of indignation mixed with fear. Who are you? Why are you doing this? This is creepy. My name is Kwon Jin-woo, he said, ignoring her accusation. And I did it because I wanted to. People don't just pay off strangers' debts because they want to, she shot back, her fear making her bold. What do you want from me? His expression was impossibly serious. To have coffee with you. She stared at him, speechless. Of all the possible answers, money, information, something sinister, that was the last one she expected. It was so simple, so absurd, that it disarmed her. You paid off tens of millions of won in debt, so you could ask me out for coffee? She asked, incredulous. You do realize you could have just asked me out for coffee, right? For 4,000 won? For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. I'm not very good at this. Clearly, she said, her sarcasm a shield. Look, Mr. Kwon Jin-woo, I don't know who you are or what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not interested. Thank you for the whatever it was, but please, leave me alone. She expected him to get angry, to insist, to use the power he so clearly possessed. Instead, he just looked at her, his dark eyes holding a surprising gentleness. I'm sorry if I frightened you. That was not my intention. He placed a 50,000 won note on the counter. For the coffee. Keep the change. And then he turned and walked out, leaving Soyeon with a racing heart and the distinct feeling that her quiet, predictable life was over. He was back the next day, and the day after that. He never mentioned the money again. He would just order a black coffee, sit at a small table in the corner, and watch her. He didn't read, he didn't look at his phone, he just watched. It was unnerving, but as the days passed, the fear began to curdle into a strange sort of familiarity. Finally, after a week of this silent ritual, she marched over to his table, a fresh coffee in her hand. Are you going to do this every day? She demanded, placing the cup down with more force than necessary. Yes, he said simply. She sighed, exasperated. Why? Because I hope that one day you'll say yes. To coffee? To dinner, he clarified. She looked at him, at his ridiculously expensive suit, at the intense sincerity in his eyes. It was insane. He was from a different universe, a universe of anonymous benefactors and silent, watchful men. But there was something else there, too. A profound loneliness that she, an expert in her own right, recognized immediately. Fine, she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could stop it. One dinner. But if you try to buy me a car or pay off my non-existent mortgage, I'm leaving. The smile that broke across his face was a thing of devastating beauty. It was like watching the sunrise after a long, dark night. It hit her like a punch to the chest. I promise, he said, and she had the sinking feeling she was in very, very deep trouble. Their first date was the study in contradictions. He picked her up not in a flashy sports car, but in a discreet black sedan with a silent driver. He didn't take her to a restaurant where she would feel out of place. Instead, he had arranged for a private tour of the Liam Museum after it had closed to the public. They walked through the silent, cavernous halls, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. He spoke about the art not like a collector who owned it, but like someone who genuinely appreciated it. He pointed out the subtle imperfections in a moon jar, the fierce energy in an abstract painting. My mother loved art, he said quietly, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It was the only thing that made her smile in the end. It was the first crack she had seen in his imposing facade, a glimpse of the man behind the money and the power. She found herself relaxing, asking questions, sharing a small piece of her own dream. "A flower shop?" he asked, his head tilted. "Why flowers?" "Because they're honest," she said without thinking. "They don't pretend to be anything they're not. They're just beautiful for a little while, and then they're gone. There's something true about that." He stopped in front of a large canvas, a chaotic swirl of black and gray with a single defiant slash of brilliant gold. He looked from the painting to her, and his eyes held an emotion so raw, so intense, it made her breath catch. "You're that gold slash, Soyeon," he murmured, more to himself than to her. His pursuit was relentless, but it changed. He seemed to understand that grand gestures made her uncomfortable. The dates became simpler, a walk along the Han River at night, sharing a hotdog from a street vendor, a visit to a sprawling, chaotic flower market at dawn, where he seemed just as out of place and just as fascinated as she was. He was slowly, methodically breaking down her defenses. She learned about his crushing sense of duty, the legacy he felt chained to. He learned about her fierce independence, her love for her family, her quiet strength. The witty banter was still there, her primary defense against the magnetic pull he exerted, but it was softer now, laced with a genuine affection she was terrified to name. He never touched her, not beyond a hand at the small of her back to guide her through a crowd, or fingers brushing hers as he handed her a cup of tea. The restraint was more potent than any overt move could have been. It made her want to be the one to close the distance. She knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that she was falling in love with him. She was standing on the edge of a cliff, and he was asking her to jump, promising he would catch her. But she still didn't know what lay in the darkness below. The first sign of the darkness came on a rainy Thursday night. Soyeon was walking home from the bus stop, huddled under her umbrella, when a motorcycle screeched to a halt beside her. 2 men in dark helmets were on it. Before she could react, the one on the back snatched her purse. It all happened so fast. They were gone in a roar of engine noise, leaving her standing in the rain, trembling and stunned. She lost her wallet, her phone, her keys. But what chilled her was the feeling that it wasn't a random mugging. They hadn't been rough. They hadn't threatened her. It felt clean, professional, like a message. When she finally got to a police station to file a report, Jinwoo was already there. He must have been calling her, and when she didn't answer, he had acted. The look on his face when he saw her was something she would never forget. It was a mask of cold, controlled fury. The air around him seemed to crackle with it. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "No, I'm fine, just shaken up. They just took my bag." He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. It wasn't just a comforting hug. It was possessive. It was protective. It was the hug of a man who was contemplating murder. He took her back to his penthouse that night. He insisted she couldn't stay in her apartment until he had the locks changed and made arrangements. She was too exhausted and shaken to argue. The next morning, her purse was delivered by a courier. Everything was inside, her wallet, her keys, even the half-eaten pack of gum. Only her phone was missing. A new one, the latest model, sat in a box beside the purse. "It was a warning," she said, her voice hollow. She was looking out his window at the city below. It didn't look beautiful anymore. It looked threatening. Jinwoo came to stand beside her. "Yes. From your world." He didn't insult her intelligence by denying it. "My uncle. He sees you as a distraction, a weakness." A cold dread washed over her. This was the catch, the darkness she had sensed beneath the surface. "What is your world, Jinwoo? You've told me about your company, about the pressure, but you haven't told me everything. I need to know. I have a right to know." He was silent for a long time, his jaw working. He looked torn, a man caught between two irreconcilable truths. Finally, he nodded. You do. He led her to his study, a room paneled in dark wood and lined with books that looked like they had never been read. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, his hands steady. He gave one to her and then stood across the room, as if putting a safe distance between them. My father didn't build a construction company, Soyeon, he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He built an organization, the Phoenix Syndicate. We have legitimate businesses, logistics, development, private equity. They are the face of the family. But the foundation? The foundation was built on other things, illegal lending, protection, things that thrive in the shadows. He took a sip of his brandy, his eyes never leaving hers, gauging her reaction. He was a ruthless man. He ruled through fear. When he died, I took over. I spent the last 5 years trying to change things, to move us into the light, to cut away the rot and legitimize everything. It's slow. It's dangerous. There are people like my uncle who prefer the old ways, who believe that what I'm doing is a betrayal of our legacy. He paused, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken violence. The men who took your purse work for him. It was a message to me, to show me that you are vulnerable, that if I continue on this path, he can hurt me by hurting you. Soyeon sank into a leather armchair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The room felt like it was tilting. A mafia boss, a kingpin. The words from movies and cheap novels were suddenly her reality. The anonymous benefactor wasn't a fairy godmother. He was a crime lord. The simple dates, the quiet moments, were all underscored by this horrifying truth. So, the money you used to pay my mother's bills, where did it come from? She whispered, the question tasting like ash in her mouth. His face tightened. The honesty was costing him everything. At the time, it came from the shadows. A sob caught in her throat. It was everything she was against. Her father had been ruined by men like that, by predatory lenders who broke him and left him with nothing. And she had been letting their king into her heart. She had been falling in love with the very thing that had destroyed her family. I can't, she said, shaking her head, the words tumbling out. I can't do this, Jinwoo. This world, it's not me. I'm the girl who works 2 jobs and dreams of a flower shop. I can't be the girlfriend of a gangster. The word felt ugly and foreign on her tongue. He flinched as if she had struck him. That's not who I am. Not anymore. Not with you. But it's the world you live in. It's the air you breathe. Danger and threats and men on motorcycles who send messages. I can't live like that. I won't. Her principles, the very core of her identity, were screaming at her. This was a line she could not cross, not even for love, especially not for love. Tears were streaming down her face now. I have to go. She stood up, her body trembling. She expected him to stop her, to command her to stay, to use that immense power he possessed. But he didn't. He just stood there, his face a mask of utter devastation. The look in his eyes broke her heart all over again. It was the look of a man watching his last hope burn to the ground. I understand, he said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. Letting her go was the most difficult thing he had ever done. It was an act of love more profound than paying off her debts or orchestrating private dates. He was letting her go to keep her safe, to keep her pure, to keep the gold slash from being consumed by the darkness. She walked out of the penthouse, out of his life, and the door clicked shut behind her, a sound of absolute finality. The world did not snap back to the way it was before. It settled into a new, grayer reality. Soyeon was safe, she was free, and she was miserable. She went back to her apartment, back to the cafe, back to the rhythms of her old life. But the life no longer fit. The ache in her feet was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. The smell of coffee was just a bitter reminder of the man who used to sit in the corner, his silent presence a strange comfort she hadn't appreciated until it was gone. The financial pressures returned, but they felt different now. Before, they were just a fact of life. Now they were a constant, nagging reminder of the choice she had made. She had chosen her principles over security, over him. And every day, she wondered if she had chosen wrong. "You look terrible," Bora told her bluntly one afternoon, sliding a cup of tea in front of her. "Like someone died." "Someone did," Soyeon mumbled into her hands. The stupid, naive girl who thought she could fall for a prince without asking what kingdom he ruled. Bora sighed, her usual sharp edges softened with sympathy. "You did the right thing, Soyeon. His world would have destroyed you." "I know," she whispered, "but my world without him feels empty." She would catch herself looking for his black sedan on the street, her heart leaping at the sight of any tall man in a dark suit. The city, which had once felt like a place of struggle, now felt like a tomb, haunted by his ghost. The nights were the worst. Lying in her small bed, she would remember the feeling of his hand on her back, the intensity in his eyes, the raw vulnerability he had shown only to her. She had run from the darkness, but in doing so, she had run from the only light she had felt in years. For Kwon Ji-nu, Soyeon's absence was a physical amputation. The penthouse, once a symbol of his power, became a mausoleum. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was suffocating. The breathtaking view of the city was just a reminder that she was down there somewhere, living a life that no longer included him. He threw himself into his work with a terrifying ferocity. He finalized the hostile takeover of a rival company in a week, a process that should have taken months. His decisions were faster, colder, more ruthless. He was the king his father had always wanted him to be, the king his uncle respected. And he had never been more miserable. "You're going to burn yourself out," Minjun said one evening, finding Jinwoo still at his desk long after midnight, staring at a spreadsheet he wasn't seeing. "Or you're going to start a war we can't win." "What does it matter?" Jinwoo said, his voice hollow. "It matters because this isn't you, not the you that you were trying to become." Minjun hesitated, then took the plunge. "This is about her." Jinwoo's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a pain so profound it made Minjun take an involuntary step back. "Don't say her name." "She left because of what this family is," Minjun pressed, his loyalty giving him courage. "And now you're becoming the worst version of it. Is that what you think she would want?" The words hit Jinwoo harder than any physical blow. Minjun was right. He had let her go to protect her from his world, and now he was sinking deeper into it, betraying the very reason she had captivated him in the first place. He had been trying to change for himself, for his own conscience. But now, he had a better reason. He had to change for her. An idea, radical and dangerous, began to form in his mind. It wasn't enough to just move the company toward legitimacy. He had to sever the roots. He had to burn the whole rotten foundation to the ground and build something new from the ashes. He couldn't ask her to join his world, so he would have to build a world she could join. It was his grand gesture of change, a declaration of war against his own past. The next day, he called a meeting of the family's top lieutenants, including his uncle, Kwon Tae-man. "As of today, we are exiting the private lending market entirely," Jinwoo announced, his voice ringing with cold authority. "All outstanding debts will be sold to a third-party collection agency. We will also be dissolving our security contracts. The Phoenix Syndicate will henceforth operate solely as a holdings company for its legitimate enterprises." The room erupted. Tae-man slammed his fist on the table, his face purple with rage. "Are you insane? You're throwing away 60 years of work. You're cutting off our primary revenue streams. This is suicide. No, Jinwoo countered, his gaze locking with his uncle's. This is survival. The old ways are a dead end. They lead to prison or an early grave. I am choosing a different path. The boy is weak, Taeman spat, appealing to the other men in the room. His father would be ashamed. He's been bewitched by some low-class girl, and now he's going to ruin us all for her. You will not speak of her, Jinwoo warned, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. And you will follow my orders. This is not a democracy. I am the head of this family. Anyone who disagrees is free to leave. But if you work against me, I will consider it a declaration of war. The lines were drawn. The battle for the soul of the Phoenix Syndicate had begun. It was a war fought not with guns, but with financial maneuvers, blackmail, and the ruthless dismantling of a criminal empire from the inside. Jinwoo used every bit of his cunning and power not to expand his darkness, but to destroy it. It was the hardest, most dangerous work of his life. And through it all, the image of So-yeon's face was his guiding star, the reason for the fight. Months passed. It was a bloody, brutal process. He lost allies. He made powerful new enemies. He survived 2 attempts on his life. But slowly, painstakingly, he was winning. He was cleaning the house he had inherited, but the final step required a sacrifice he hadn't anticipated. To secure a massive, game-changing merger with the ultra-legitimate Taeyoung Corporation, their chairman had one non-negotiable condition: a marriage between Jinwoo and his daughter, Cherin. It was a classic dynastic alliance, a move that would cement his new, legitimate empire and silence his critics forever. It would also mean giving up any hope of ever being with So-yeon. He looked at the empire he had bled to create, a clean world, a safe world, a world fit for her. And he realized, with a soul-crushing irony, that to complete it, he had to lock himself out of it forever. He thought of So-yeon's honest flowers, the ones that were beautiful for a little while and then were gone. Maybe that's all they were ever meant to be. A brief, beautiful season. With a heavy heart and an empty soul, he agreed to the marriage. So-yeon needed money. Her mother had taken a turn for the worse, and a new, experimental treatment wasn't covered by her insurance. It was expensive, desperately so. When Bora mentioned a friend who ran a catering company needed extra staff for a high-profile wedding, paying triple the normal rate in cash for one night's work, So-yeon didn't hesitate. She didn't ask who the wedding was for. It didn't matter. It was just a job. Another night of being an invisible ghost in someone else's extravagant life. She was so focused on not dropping her tray, on navigating the crush of bodies in expensive suits and silk dresses, that she never once looked at the dais. She didn't see the groom's face. The name Kwon meant nothing to her. It was as common as Kim or Park. Then it happened. A clumsy guest bumped into her, hard. She stumbled and the tray of ruby-red cocktails went flying. Her entire world narrowed to the horrifying sight of a drink arcing through the air and landing squarely on the pale pink dress of a woman who looked like she'd never had a bad day in her life. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She dropped to her knees, stammering apologies, her mind a blank panic. Then came the laughter, cruel, dismissive, the laughter of people who saw her as less than human, as a clumsy obstacle in their perfect evening. It was the story of her life, crystallized in one awful moment. A sudden, profound silence fell over the room. She felt a presence looming over her. "Get up," a voice said. A voice she knew. A voice that had haunted her dreams for months. Her head snapped up, and her eyes met his. Kwon Jin-woo. Her heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs. He was the groom. Of course he was. He had moved on. He was marrying someone from his own world, a beautiful, wealthy woman. The pain was so sharp, so sudden, it stole her breath. He held out his hand. Her own hand seemed to move of its own volition, taking his. His touch was an electric shock, a jolt of life. He pulled her to her feet, his grip firm, protective. And then he turned his back on his bride, on his wedding, on his entire future, and faced the room. "The wedding is off," he announced. Soyeon's mind couldn't process the words. She was trapped in a surreal dream. He kept her hand locked in his and began to lead her away, cutting a path through the sea of shocked and gaping faces. The whispers rose to a roar behind them. The bride was shouting his name, but Jinwoo didn't slow down. He walked with the absolute certainty of a man who had just found his way home after being lost for a very long time. He pulled her through the ballroom doors, down a long marble hallway, and out into the cool night air of a private garden. The sounds of the chaos inside faded to a distant murmur. He finally stopped, turning to face her under the soft glow of a garden lamp. He still held her hand. "Jinwoo, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your wedding." "It wasn't my wedding," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "It was a business deal. A final, stupid step to build a world I thought you could live in." He reached up with his free hand, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. His touch was hesitant, as if he feared she might be a mirage that would vanish. "I did it, Soyeon," he said, his dark eyes pleading with her to understand. "I tore it all down. The syndicate, the lending, the violence. It's gone. I spent months fighting, bleeding, becoming a man I thought could be worthy of you. The marriage was the final piece, the key to making it all permanent. I was going to sacrifice my life to build a kingdom I could never share with the only person who mattered." He let out a harsh, self-deprecating laugh. "I was a fool. I thought I could live without you. I thought power and a clean name would be enough. But then I saw you tonight. I saw them laugh at you, and I realized none of it matters. Not the companies, not the money, not the power. Nothing matters without you." Tears were welling in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Tears of shock, of disbelief, of a hope so fierce it hurt. "You did all that for me?" "I would burn the world down for you, Soyeon," he said, his voice thick with a love so potent it was a living thing between them. "Seeing you again, I knew. I can't live in a world you're not in. I don't want a kingdom. I just want you." He searched her face, his own expression stripped bare of all its armor, showing only the vulnerable man beneath. "Please," he whispered, a desperate plea. "Tell me I didn't just make the biggest mistake of my life. Or the best one." She didn't need to answer with words. She surged forward, rising onto her toes, and crashed her lips against his. The reunion kiss was not gentle or sweet. It was desperate. It was hungry. It was a collision of months of heartache and longing, of sacrifice and lonely nights. It was the taste of forgiveness and the promise of a new beginning. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, and he kissed her back with a raw, possessive intensity that staked his claim on her soul. In that moment, under the quiet stars, surrounded by the wreckage of his old life, they were not a kingpin and a waitress. They were just a man and a woman who had found their way back to each other, ready to build a new world together. 1 year later, the bell over the door of Soyeon's garden chimed softly. The small shop was an oasis of color and fragrance on a bustling Seoul street. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating buckets of vibrant tulips, delicate freesias, and proud, elegant lilies. Soyeon was at the counter, her hands dusty with pollen, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and a serene smile on her face. The loan for the shop had come from a bank, a normal bank. The application had been approved on its own merits. She had insisted on it. The man who walked in was no longer a shadow in a perfect suit. Jin-woo wore a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, looking more like a university professor than the chairman of one of Asia's fastest-growing legitimate corporations. The scar on his eyebrow was still there, but the hardness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a soft, constant warmth that was reserved only for her. He leaned over the counter, stealing a quick, sweet kiss. "How's business, boss?" he murmured against her lips. "Booming," she laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "That new hotel contract you didn't help me get is keeping me busy." He grinned, the expression still new enough to make her heart skip a beat. "I might have mentioned to the hotel manager that my favorite florist in the entire city was located at this address. That's not helping. That's just spreading the good word." He looked around the small shop, at the beauty she had created from nothing but a dream and hard work. His gaze was filled with a quiet, profound pride. He had torn down his empire for her, and in return, she had shown him how to build a life. He picked up a single, perfect white rose, its petals just beginning to unfurl. He tucked it behind her ear, his fingers lingering in her hair. "You're still the gold slash, Soyeon," he said softly. "And you're the man who learned how to see it," she replied, her heart full. Their past was a story of darkness and light, of struggle and power. But their future was this: simple moments, the scent of flowers, a quiet love that was stronger than any empire, a life they had chosen, together. In the end, this story teaches us that true strength isn't found in power or control over others, but in the courage to change for the better. It suggests that love's redemptive power can inspire us to dismantle the darkest parts of our lives and build something new and worthy. It's a reminder that a person's value isn't defined by their circumstances, but by their heart and their willingness to fight for a life of integrity and happiness. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. We work hard to create stories that are not only entertaining, but also offer insights into human nature and the difficult choices we all face. If you were moved by Jinwoo and Soyeon's journey, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more dramatic romances, and share it with someone who loves a story about second chances. Now we have a question for you. When Jinwoo confessed the truth about his family, Soyeon chose to leave. Do you think she made the right decision at that moment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And finally, we want to know what you'd like to see next. Should our next story focus on A. Min-jun, the loyal second-in-command, as he finds an unexpected love of his own while navigating the new, legitimate company? Or B. Kwon Tae-man, the vengeful uncle, in a story of his downfall and a last-minute chance at redemption? Vote in the comments.